Hey guys, it's Will.
And I'm Mike. Hello.
Welcome to First Watch, the show that's part review, part reaction. Today we were talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Surprise, yeah.
We saw it last Thursday, so that would be July 25th, because it came out on the 26th, right?
Yep.
And we saw it the day before. We saw it in 35mm at the ArcLight in Culver City. It was a really cool experience.
Really cool.
So we are here to talk about the movie.
And there's going to be a bunch of spoilers, so
Yes,
if for some reason you're watching this but you haven't seen the movie, I don't understand why, and you don't want spoilers, which I can guarantee you don't want spoilers before you see this movie.
Yeah, you really don't.
You may want to just like save this and come back to it.
I feel like this movie especially is... The nature of it is so specific that it's hard to talk about without giving away some stuff.
No, we're just going to give a bunch away.
But knowing Mike, he's just a wild beast, and he's going to give away the ending immediately.
I've warned you. I've warned you. So if you're still here and you haven't seen it, you're going to get spoiled.
Yeah. Basically the whole thing. So
we both liked it, right?
Well, I might go so far as to say I loved it. I mean, it's still one of those things where... we talked about this in we did a ranking of Tarantino's films too, and I mentioned this there, but like with Inglourious Basterds, for instance, I watched that movie and I was just like stunned. I was like amazed in the theater, like holy shit, that movie is one of the best movies I've ever seen. I had to see it again immediately. Django, I had a similar experience. Hateful Eight, obviously, the first time I saw Pulp Fiction, my head just exploded. With this movie, it was like, it's very, like, melancholy. It's weird because it's hilarious, right?
It's funny in parts,
but it's very kind of melancholy.
But it's like a kind of a sad thing.
And sad, and there's something about the way, it's very, like, and I'll say this a lot, but it reminds me a lot of Fellini, so I'll call it Fellini-esque. Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me of the French New Wave as well, and it's very kind of observational, like, and it's obviously like a fantasy, but it's informed by neorealism, which is this really interesting kind of dichotomy that Fellini has, where he's making films that grew out of neorealism, but are completely fantastical. Yeah.
To me, it's basically, it's like a fairy tale, kind of like Inglourious Basterds is a fairy tale. We all know Hitler didn't die in a theater getting gunned down by a
well, we also,
right?
like Django Unchained, like we know that slaves didn't go and blow up plantations. No. And
so it's basically a fairy tale of 1969, the Manson family, and an alternate history of what might have happened if they picked the wrong house that night.
And also, and there's your spoiler. It's also about, I mean, it's very much about, obviously on the surface, we'll tell you that it's about
like the end
that huge transition in Hollywood of like, you know, like you have this kind of like dying old breed of actors and ways of making films as being pushed out by, and to mention the European films like the French New Wave and things like that have shown up, and people
Italian films, spaghetti westerns.
Exactly, and then Dennis Hopper, Easy Rider made a huge, and like Midnight Cowboy and those types of movies, and then this is like right before Coppola, Spielberg, like all those guys show up.
Not only is this basically the end of the decade, it's 1969, but it's also kind of the end of that era of old Hollywood filmmaking.
Well, and the Manson murders are very famously known as like the end of the euphoric kind of hippie era.
Yeah, that was the end of that. And like you said, it's super funny in parts. There's just like some like laugh out loud moments, but behind it all is like this melancholy thing, because DiCaprio's character is funny, and he does a lot of funny stuff, and we laugh because he's like a beast and abusing. But like, there's a real sadness to it because he's like an aging actor, and at this time, this guy's been starring in TV and in movies, and then all of a sudden that dries up, and it's a very common thing for a lot of actors to go through. And we're kind of seeing him like he went from being the star to being a guest star bad guy, right? And he's told that his career is ending, and it's just like it's kind of a sad thing to do, because while he is kind of like kind of beast, and he smokes a lot, and does that, he's not evil, he's not bad. No,
it's like
he's not a bad
it's interesting
person.
Because they're like this is gonna sound pretentious because it's a Shakespeare reference, but they're almost like Falstaff. They're like these lovable clowns, where like you feel bad for them because they're kind of pathetic. But they're also just like, you laugh at them a lot.
I kind of want to hang out with them.
No, but that's the thing about Falstaff. He's always drunk, and he's really funny, but he doesn't always mean to be funny. Yeah. So it's this kind of thing of like, they're fun people and they're interesting people, but half of it, like, they're clowns basically, and the fools.
To me,
but in a kind of like in a sad, like, you want to love them way.
To me, and there's like a lot of parallels with actual people. There's actual directors, actual actors, Sharon Tate, obviously, Sam Wanamaker,
Roman Polanski is a little bit, Bruce Lee is in it.
Yeah. And his career, DiCaprio character's career, what was his name? It was
Rick Dalton.
Rick Dalton, sorry.
And Cliff Booth.
Yeah. So Rick Dalton's career mirrors a lot of like one of my favorite actors, Clint Eastwood, who in the 50s and coming up, 50s or in 60s, he was making cowboy shows.
Mm-hmm.
And it just it was fine. Like a leading man in a TV show is a good career, but it's not a film star. Back then, being a film star was at the top.
Especially not at the level that Clint Eastwood became.
And so he went over and did spaghetti westerns with Sergio Leone, which he does in this movie as well. He goes over and makes spaghetti westerns, and it kind of kicks his career back a little bit. And Clint Eastwood, it kind of kicked his career off big time, because after he came back from doing the 3 spaghetti westerns, which are some of my favorite films of all time, actually, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is my favorite film of all time. He came back and he did all the Dirty Harrys. He directed his own western. He did Unforgiven. He did all these. He went on to have this amazing career, and he's still making movies. So Rick Dalton's career,
like almost 90, isn't
he? Rick Dalton's career kind of played out like that as well, and we're left to our imaginations what happens at the end, because
the end it's interesting because Inglourious Basterds has such a big ending.
Yeah.
Django has such a big.
This
ending.
has the biggest ending, I think.
Well, I don't mean like the conclusion. I mean that very, very final shot is very kind of like. I feel like this movie is very sentimental in a way that you get that with Tarantino in other films, but not as the final thing that he leaves you with. And in this movie, it's almost because he says a lot in interviews. If you read between the lines or you listen carefully, he talks about a lot about peace, and he always does the peace sign in photos, and he talks about love, and he talks about and he makes very violent movies, and I almost people aren't listening to that or they're not taking him seriously. But the end of this movie is almost like this very sad wish of maybe could have been this way.
What we wish would have happened.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and spoil. So for those who don't know a lot of true crime, I forget the exact day. It was August 1969. Members of the Manson family went to the address where Sharon Tate lived, and they murdered her, J.C. Bring, and a couple other people there, and she was 8 months pregnant with their kid, and they stabbed him and murdered him. The next day or two, they went on a killing spree until they were finally caught. There's the whole big media circus about the trial and so forth and so forth. And in this movie, it looks like that's about to happen, right? We have this movie. We see Sharon Tate throughout the film, just
so the
being
movie,
real sweet and innocent.
To give you a setup, it's 3 days, right? It takes place over 3 days. It's 2 days in February. Well, then there's a 6-month break, and then it's the third
there's
day
the break
in
because
August.
he goes over to Italy to make movies.
But that is a kind of a bridge. It's not its own huge section.
You only see
of the movie.
5 minutes of it, and you see Sharon Tate throughout, and you really get to like her because she's this really sweet young actress who's super excited to see herself in a film that she made.
Which I have to say, that scene has been criticized because people are like, "Oh, she's this ditzy blonde. Tarantino's not portraying her correctly. She goes into the theater and she's so pleased with seeing herself." But as someone who has acted before, and I've written plays, and you sit in the back of the theater and you listen to people watching your play, that experience is unlike anything else you could ever experience, and it's really amazing. And to be an actor and to be able to go into a theater in LA and watch yourself on a screen and hear people laughing
and laughing with you,
that really would be that experience. I don't think that he is.
Can you
imagine? I don't know. It's as someone who's been in a similar experience, it's really hard for me to see that he's making her look like a manic pixie dream girl type. It's that's a real emotion. That's a very a real grounded scene.
She's a 26-year-old actress. This is probably one of her biggest films ever. She's in a movie with Dean Martin in the 60s. That's as big as it gets, right? And she's excited to see herself in it because this could be the start of a really big career. I'd be happy.
Yeah,
and it's not I don't get it. So whatever, we're not gonna go into that. And then at the end, you see the Manson family going up to the house. Yeah, okay. I wonder how much he's gonna show, what he's gonna do. But they go in the wrong house. They've been having beef with Cliff, and Cliff's just the beast.
So Cliff is Brad Pitt, who is
stunt double.
Rick Dalton's stunt double,
and he's a army vet, and he don't take no shit from nobody. He beats up Bruce Lee in this movie, so he's a badass. And they go in the house, and he's high on acid, but he still has enough wits to know he's about to destroy these people. And his dog, he has a really well-trained pit bull, and so the 3 Manson people just get the shit beat out of them. And it's so satisfying because you really wish that would have happened in real life, right? It didn't. It's sad. It didn't. But it's you wish that would have happened. And it's you're reveling in how bad they are getting destroyed.
Yeah, it's bad.
He throws a can in her face, and she's and then at the end, Do you want to tell?
You were so excited about it. So when this happened, Mike actually started like.
I got excited because I knew it was coming
in the theater. Yeah.
Earlier in the film, you see some of the roles that Rick Dalton's in.
Yeah.
And one of those is a World War II movie where he has a flamethrower and he burns a bunch of Nazis alive. And he shows someone the flamethrower in his shed earlier in the movie. And so one of the Manson kids, I think the last one alive, crashes through the window and falls in the pool where he's drinking and relaxing. And she's pretty fucked up, but she's still swinging a knife and still comes at him.
She has a gun, doesn't she?
I think she has. I don't know if she has a gun or not.
Firing a gun in the air.
And so he goes in his tool shed and gets the flamethrower and just like burns her, and it's just like amazing. But the funniest part is like 3 minutes later, they're just chilling in the cul-de-sac, and then he's talking about it. He's like, "Yeah, I just murdered 3 hippies, and no one cares." Yeah, it's so funny and it's so satisfying, and it's like, I wish that would have really happened in real life.
He loves murder.
I don't love murder, but I love where bad people get murdered instead of like innocent people.
Like, I mean, this is a phrase that I've coined to myself when I talk to myself about Tarantino movies, but it's like a moment of historical catharsis, right? And that's like Inglourious Basterds is obviously historical catharsis because it's Jews killing Hitler. Django Unchained is a slave killing a slave master. And then in Kill Bill, you have a woman who is abused by a jealous man, and he turns other women against her, killing all those people. So that's like, it's a theme in his movies of he makes these fantasies where he corrects what he sees as injustices and like things that turned history the wrong way. And I mean, Hateful Eight is kind of about, Hateful Eight is almost like the negative version of that, of like, here is the ugliest version of what America has become as a result of the Civil War, basically. Yeah.
And I think the ending of Once Upon a Time is like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Like it's pretty lengthy.
It's a pretty big sequence, yeah.
And it was just all satisfying. And it's like, it all built up to that moment. And the moment, I thought they were going to show the Sharon Tate's murder and all that stuff. And when it didn't happen and this was happening, the second they walked into the house and saw Cliff,
you knew something crazy was going to happen.
Yes. I was like, because I was like, how are they going to tie this in? It's been building, and the reason they walk into Cliff's house is because Rick Dalton is the neighbor of Sharon Tate, so they go. He lives right next door. They go into the wrong house, and it's magical.
There's a couple other things I want to touch on before we get out of your hair. To be pretentious about it.
That's what Will does.
That's what I do. So there's a lot of like meta devices, if you want to call them that, happening in this movie. Like, you have a lot of doppelgangers, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously you have actor, stuntman, so they're obvious doppelgangers for one another, right? Then you have DiCaprio lives right next to Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, and he eventually gets married to that Italian actress, right? And there's a scene that is identical to so the movie starts with Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski arriving in Los Angeles, and there's all these paparazzi at the airport, and they're dressed in a very specific way. When DiCaprio comes back from doing his spaghetti westerns, he's dressed in the same way, and it's like, they have this whole kind of like allure about them, but there's no paparazzi, there's no one like, there's all of these parallels that he creates. That in, like, Sharon Tate is watching herself on a movie screen, right? So it's an actor watching an actor, and then you have them like on the sets of the movies that they're in, TV shows, and it's like you know that you're watching an actor, and yet they are playing an actor who is acting in the movie. Yeah. And almost everything that Rick Dalton is in is a Western, right? And Westerns are very important to American self-conception and American history, because essentially Westerns are the way that we created our notion of who we are, right? So these John Wayne, like these heroic figures, and like even before movies, like the myths of the Old West were so important to like American identity. And what is LA? It is the furthest west, right? Like California is the western coast. So you have these people in the far west living this mythic dream of Hollywood, making these mythic dreams about the Old West. It's like there's so many layers to these devices that I feel like you could write a dissertation on this movie and never find the end to the meanings of it. It's also interesting to me that, I mean, basically all of his movies are narratives, and this is not a narrative. Like, it's day in the life type movie. Yeah, like, it's not like...
It's almost like there's no plot. I don't want to say there's not no plot,
but like, what's interesting about that to me is there isn't really a plot.
It's just like, here's...
But
experience
that's interesting to me because there's the way that the structure is drawn out. Each scene tells you something about the themes. So rather than the movie being propelled by a physical plot, it's propelled by the ideas of what's going on in the film. I will also say, I mentioned Fellini before. I'm just going to mention one more thing, and I'll stop talking about this. So if you've seen La Dolce Vita, you know that movie is 6 days, right? And it's a very funny movie that is also very melancholy, and it's also about 3 hours long. This is like 2:45, right?
Yeah, about 2:45.
And it has a kind of a surprising ending. And one of my favorite endings in movies ever, and it brings a lot of history into it. It also takes place in the 60s. I mean, it was made in 1960s, so that makes sense that it takes place in the 60s. But there are so many parallels between these two movies that I have to believe that he was watching La Dolce Vita, or at least it was in his mind. He's mentioned Claude Lelouch, who was a French filmmaker in the 60s, as a reference point for this movie, but it's so Fellini-esque to me. And there's so many, like, La Dolce Vita is about these people having fun, doing drugs, like hanging out with celebrities, having sex, but it's really about these very kind of sad things, and I think that that's kind of the case with this movie, too.
There's a ton of Easter eggs. I think I've read that the scene they're going into a restaurant, and they mention that there's a porn theater down the street. So that's actually the New Beverly, which
he owns
now.
Yeah, there's like a lot of stuff like that.
There's a bunch of like music. Like there's a scene where they're talking about Polanski's Rosemary Baby. There's
and there's also
a lot of stuff.
There's a movie within the movie that DiCaprio's character is in, which is directed by Antonio Margaretti, which is the name the guy uses in Inglourious Basterds, right? When he's like Margaret, like Eli Roth, isn't that his code name?
I think so, yeah. And I looked it up. So the role that he gets later on as a bad guy in the TV series Lancer by Sam Wanamaker is a real TV show called Lancer directed by Sam Wanamaker. So that is a real thing, and if you like old Hollywood, if you have any interest in filmmaking, you'll love it for scenes like that. And there's a lot of fun stuff that you'll watch, and you'll be like, "That's so cool." Even if you just don't like all of it, there's a bunch of stuff in there that you're gonna like. I think most people are gonna like this movie.
It's like, I mean, I'm talking a lot about comparing it to La Dolce Vita, the influence of the French New Wave, but it's a really funny movie. Like, I would say more so than any movie of his. It's like more of a straight up comedy.
It's his most comedic movie, I would say.
So we both really liked it, I think.
We did.
And you should check it out. We've talked a lot. Sorry. Check out our ranking of Tarantino's movies. Let us know what you think about this movie.
See where it ranks. Is it number 1? Is it number 5? Number 9? I don't know. Find out.
So I've been Will.
I've been Mike. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.